Okay, so you know how like giving feedback can be tough,
Mm.
especially when you know it's not going to be well received?
Oh, yeah.
Like it can be kind of
I think I
terrifying.
actually.
But like
Okay.
you're not alone in this,
Yeah.
right? And you sent over this article, How to Give Feedback to Someone Who Doesn't Want It. 12 Proven Strategies by Kerry and Cassidy.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one.
And it's seriously a gold mine. So if you're like prepping for one of those tough conversations, or you just want to become like a feedback master, you know,
Yeah.
you're in the right place. We're doing a deep dive today into tackling feedback resistance. When it comes
Yeah.
to like your boss, a peer, or a team member.
Yeah, feedback resistance, it's definitely a universal struggle. What I find really interesting is that Cassidy's strategies, they don't just help you like navigate those tricky situations,
Yeah.
but they can actually lead to stronger relationships, better performance, and even spark innovation.
Wow.
It's about turning a potentially negative experience into a positive one.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's like break this down. First
Yeah.
up, how do you give feedback to your boss
Yeah.
without, getting fired?
Let's see. Right. Well, Cassidy's first strategy is to ask for permission. So think about it. How much more open are you to hearing something when you feel in control?
Yeah.
Right? If you just like launch into a critique, your boss is probably just going to get defensive. But if you approach it collaboratively, it totally changes the whole dynamic.
Okay, so instead of like barging into their office with like a laundry list of complaints,
Mhm.
I could say something like, hey, would it be all right if I shared some thoughts about the recent project timelines?
Mhm.
I have some ideas that I think could really boost our efficiency.
Exactly. That subtle shift in framing can make all the difference. You're not attacking their decisions. You're offering to help them achieve shared goals.
So it's like saying, I'm on your team and I want to see us both succeed.
Right. Now, another strategy Cassidy emphasizes is focusing on those shared goals, like right from the get-go. It's about aligning your feedback with the bigger picture and showing how addressing certain areas can benefit everyone.
Okay, so instead of saying, I think you're micromanaging, I could say, I've noticed that the team's been a bit hesitant to take initiative lately, and I think it might be impacting our overall creativity. Do you think there's a way we can empower them to take more ownership?
That's a great example. You're not pointing fingers. You're focusing on the desired outcome, a more creative and empowered team. And by framing it as a question, you're inviting your boss to be part of the solution.
I am liking this collaborative approach, but let's be honest, sometimes you need to bring like hard data to the table, especially when you're dealing with someone who loves numbers.
Absolutely. Cassidy recommends using data and examples whenever possible. It takes the emotion out of the equation and appeals to your boss's logical side. Instead of saying, I think we're spending too much time on meetings, you could say, I analyzed our team's calendar and found that we're averaging 15 hours a week in meetings. Research shows that excessive meeting time can decrease productivity by up to 25%. Maybe we could try shortening some of our meetings or consolidating them.
Okay, I see how data can be powerful. But I have to admit, I'm a little hesitant to give my boss any kind of feedback, even if it's data-driven.
That's understandable. This is where Cassidy's strategy of leading with positivity comes in. Start by acknowledging your boss's strengths or something you appreciate about their leadership style. It helps create a more receptive environment for the feedback that follows.
So I could say something like, I really appreciate how you always encourage us to think outside the box. And building on that, I'd love to discuss a potential opportunity for our team to be even more innovative.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the positive before diving into the areas for improvement. It's not about sugarcoating. It's about setting a positive tone for the conversation.
Okay, so we've covered some strategies for giving feedback to a boss. But what about team members? That seems equally tricky, just in a different way.
Yeah, it definitely has its own challenges. You're responsible for their growth and development, but you don't want to come across as overbearing or critical. One of Cassidy's most effective strategies for team members is using the SBI model, Situation, Behavior, Impact. It keeps the feedback clear, concise, and focused on specific actions and outcomes.
I've heard of the SBI model. Can you give me like a real-world example?
Absolutely. Let's say a team member consistently misses deadlines. Instead of saying, you need to be more organized, you could say, in our last project meeting, you committed to having the report finalized by Friday. However, it wasn't submitted until Monday, which delayed the entire project launch.
Okay, that's much more specific and actionable. It clearly outlines the situation, the behavior, and the impact of that behavior without placing blame.
Exactly. And by focusing on the facts, you minimize the chance of the feedback being perceived as personal or subjective.
So instead of getting defensive, they can actually learn from their mistakes and improve their performance.
I like it. Another great strategy Cassidy recommends for team members is asking open-ended questions. It encourages self-reflection and helps them take ownership of their actions.
So instead of saying, your presentation wasn't engaging, I could ask, how do you think your presentation went? What do you think worked well? What could have been improved?
Exactly. Those types of questions encourage them to critically analyze their own performance and come up with their own solutions, which is far more effective than simply telling them what to do.
This is all great stuff. But what about when you need to give positive feedback? Is there a specific strategy for that?
Cassidy recommends highlighting strengths before areas for improvement. Starting with a compliment primes them for constructive feedback.
So instead of jumping straight into criticism, I can say something like, I'm really impressed with your attention to detail in the recent project report. Now let's work on ensuring that all reports are submitted on time to maximize their impact.
That's a great example. You're acknowledging their strengths while also pointing out an area where they can grow. It's a balanced approach that helps them feel valued and motivated to improve.
This is all making a lot of sense. I feel like I'm already starting to think differently about how I approach feedback. But what about giving feedback to a peer? That always feels like walking a tightrope.
It can be tricky, but Cassidy offers some valuable insights on that as well. One of her key recommendations is building on shared respect. Before diving into the feedback, acknowledge each other's value and expertise. This helps establish a foundation of trust and collaboration.
Okay, so instead of launching into a critique of their presentation style, I could start by saying, I really admire your ability to connect with the audience. Could we brainstorm ways to make the content even more impactful?
Precisely. You're acknowledging their strengths while also creating an opportunity for a constructive conversation. This collaborative approach can make all the difference in how the feedback is received.
This is all great stuff. But how do you deal with defensiveness? What if they just shut down or get angry when you try to give them feedback?
Defensiveness is a natural human response. When we feel threatened or criticized, our brains go into fight or flight mode. It's important to approach these situations with empathy and patience. Try to understand their perspective.
So instead of getting defensive myself, I could say something like, I can see that this is difficult to hear. I'm not trying to attack you. I just want to help us both improve.
Exactly. Acknowledging their feelings and reassuring them of your positive intentions can go a long way in de-escalating the situation and opening the door to a more productive conversation.
This is so helpful. I feel like I'm already starting to see feedback in a whole new light.
Yeah.
But we've covered a lot of ground here. Should we take a quick break and come back to tackle some real-life examples of feedback gone wrong and feedback done right?
That sounds like a great plan. Let's give our listeners a moment to digest all this great information and come back refreshed and ready for more.
Sounds good. We'll be right back after a quick break.
All right, so let's jump into some real world examples. I think it's through these scenarios that we can really see the impact of these strategies. Have you ever witnessed a feedback fail?
Oh, absolutely. I once had a manager who would give feedback during team meetings. It was brutal.
Oof, yeah, public criticism. It's one of the fastest ways to just shut down communication
Yeah.
and create a toxic work environment, It triggers those feelings of shame and humiliation, which makes it impossible to actually receive the feedback effectively.
It felt like everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid to speak up or share ideas for fear of being publicly ridiculed. It definitely didn't foster a culture of growth and learning, that's for sure.
Now imagine a different scenario. Let's say a manager notices a team member's struggling with a new software program. Instead of criticizing them publicly, they pull them aside for a private conversation.
Okay, that's already a much better approach. Privacy creates a sense of safety and respect. It shows that you care about their feelings and you want to have a productive conversation.
Right. And instead of saying, you're really slow at using this program, they use the SBI model to provide specific and behavioral feedback. They might say something like, I noticed that during this morning's training session, you were having some trouble navigating the new project management software, which caused a bit of a delay in getting the project started.
That's a great example of how the SBI model keeps the feedback focused on observable actions and their consequences. It removes the personal judgment and makes it easier for the team member to actually hear the feedback without feeling attacked.
Exactly. And what's even better is that the manager then follows up by asking open-ended questions, something like, what are some things that would help you feel more comfortable using the new software?
Those open-ended questions are so powerful because they invite the team member to be part of the solution. It's not about dictating what they should do. It's about empowering them to take ownership of their development.
Let's look at another example. Imagine a peer giving feedback that's vague and unhelpful. They say something like, your presentation was kind of boring.
Ouch. That's not helpful at all. It's just a subjective opinion without any specific guidance on how to improve.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly demoralizing for the person receiving the feedback. Instead, imagine that peer saying something like, I noticed that during your presentation, the audience seemed to lose interest when you were going through the technical details. Perhaps you could try incorporating more visuals or storytelling techniques to keep them engaged.
Now that's constructive feedback. It's specific, actionable, and offers tangible suggestions for improvement. The presenter now knows exactly what they can do differently next time.
Remember, effective feedback is always solution-oriented. It's about helping people identify areas where they can grow and providing them with the tools and support they need to succeed.
So it's not about being critical or judgmental. It's about being helpful and supportive. I think that's a really important takeaway. But so far, we've mainly focused on, giving feedback. What about receiving it?
That's an excellent point. Being able to receive feedback gracefully is just as important as being able to give it effectively. It's all about shifting our mindset from defensiveness to curiosity.
So instead of feeling attacked or criticized, we should try to see feedback as a valuable opportunity to learn and grow.
Exactly. Even if we don't agree with the feedback, there's always something we can learn from it. It helps us gain new perspectives and see our blind spots.
It's like having a personal coach or mentor offering their insights to help us become better versions of ourselves.
And remember, even if the feedback is delivered in a way that's not ideal, it's important to focus on the message, not the messenger.
So instead of getting caught up in the emotion or tone of the feedback, we should try to extract the valuable nuggets of information that can help us improve.
Right. And remember, feedback is a two-way street. Don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions, share your perspective, and engage in a dialogue.
This has been so incredibly helpful. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for navigating the sometimes treacherous waters of feedback.
I'm glad to hear that. Remember, effective feedback is a skill that takes practice and patience. Don't be discouraged if you don't get it right every time. The more you practice, the more confident and skilled you'll become.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, let's do a quick recap of some key takeaways for our listeners.
The first key takeaway is to always tailor your approach to the individual and the situation. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to feedback. What works for one person might not work for another.
And secondly, always strive to create the safe and respectful environment for feedback, whether you're giving it or receiving it. This means being mindful of your tone, language, and timing.
Third, focus on specific behaviors and their impact. Avoid vague generalizations or personal judgments.
And finally, remember that feedback is an opportunity for growth and development. Embrace it with a growth mindset and use it to become the best version of yourself.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of feedback.
Wait, before we go, I want to ask you one last question. What's the most common mistake you see people making when it comes to feedback?
That's a great question. I think the most common mistake is avoiding it altogether. People are often so afraid of conflict or hurting someone's feelings that they avoid giving feedback altogether. But in reality, avoiding feedback can be far more damaging in the long run.
Because those unaddressed issues can fester and grow, leading to bigger problems down the road.
Exactly. So remember, even if it feels uncomfortable, giving and receiving feedback is essential for growth and success. It's a sign of respect, care, and a desire to see each other thrive.
So true. Thanks for all the amazing insights. I feel like I can now face any feedback situation with confidence and grace. And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive helpful. Remember, we're all in this together. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep those feedback conversations flowing.
Feel free to reach out to us on social media with your questions, challenges, and feedback triumphs.
That's right. We're a community of feedback enthusiasts, and we're all in this together. Until next time, happy feedbacking.
It's funny, right? Like how feedback is often framed as like this negative, scary thing. But when you really break it down, it's really just about communication. It's about helping each other grow and improve.
It's true. And that's what's so cool about these strategies. They're not just about delivering a message. They're about creating a space for positive change.
Exactly. It's about shifting that focus from criticism to collaboration. And that brings us to our final point. How do we cultivate a culture of feedback where it's seen as a valuable tool for growth rather than a weapon?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Because even with all the best strategies, if the overall culture is resistant to feedback, it's going to be an uphill battle.
I think it starts with leadership. Leaders need to model the behavior that they want to see in their teams. They need to be open to receiving feedback, even if it's tough to hear.
So leading by example makes sense. If my boss is constantly asking for feedback and demonstrating a willingness to learn and grow, it's going to create like a ripple effect throughout the whole team.
Exactly. And it's not just about receiving feedback, it's about giving it effectively as well. Leaders need to create a safe space where people feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas without fear of judgment or retaliation.
Yeah, that psychological safety is so important. If I feel like I'm going to get punished or ridiculed for speaking up, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
For sure. And when people are afraid to speak up, it just stifles innovation, creativity, and ultimately progress.
Okay, so leadership plays a huge role. But what about the rest of us? What can we do to contribute to a more feedback-friendly culture?
I think it starts with being mindful of our own language and behavior. Are we approachable? Do we listen actively? Do we respond to feedback with curiosity rather than defensiveness?
So being self-aware and intentional about how we communicate. That seems doable.
Totally. And remember, creating a feedback culture is an ongoing process. It's about consistent effort and open communication. It's about celebrating successes and learning from mistakes. It's about creating an environment where feedback is seen as a gift, not a burden.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Feedback is a gift that can help us all grow and become better versions of ourselves.
Couldn't agree more.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to embrace feedback, both giving and receiving. It might feel uncomfortable at times, but the rewards are well worth it. And remember, we're always here to support you on your feedback journey.
Feel free to reach out to us on social media with your questions, challenges, and feedback triumphs.
That's right. We're a community of feedback enthusiasts, and we're all in this together. Until next time, happy feedbacking.